All right, ready to dive into this.
Yeah, let's do it.
This deep dive, it tackles self-improvement,
Okay.
but like through a lens I wouldn't say is for the faint of heart.
Right.
We're really gonna like pick apart this idea of maximizing the hand you're dealt,
Okay.
especially as it applies to men facing challenges.
Right.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts as we go, because some of this is pretty in your face.
Yeah, sure.
It jumps right in with this short man challenge, right?
Yeah.
It's almost using height as a stand-in for any perceived disadvantage.
Yeah.
The message seems to be stop complaining about things you can't change,
Right.
and instead focus on playing the hand you were dealt.
Yeah.
What do you make of that analogy, by the way? I'm
Yeah.
not sure I entirely buy it.
It's interesting, I think, right? Like the card game analogy.
Okay.
It's like it really highlights this idea of you have to accept your givens
Mm-hmm.
and then strategize from there.
Okay.
But then where it gets really complicated is like, what happens when the rules of the game itself feel stacked against you?
Right.
You know,
Right.
can you truly separate self-acceptance from the drive to improve, especially in a world full of, let's face it, some pretty intense societal expectations?
Yeah. It's like saying, just be happy with the cards you got,
Right.
but then also saying, and by the way, here's a list of qualities.
Right. Exactly.
Wealth, strength, connections, humor, charisma.
Yes.
That'll make you more valuable.
Right.
Feels a bit contradictory, doesn't it?
But it is. It's very much like a specific, and some might argue, limited definition of worth.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
should it really all boil down to external factors like those?
Right.
On the one hand, it encourages shifting your focus to things you can potentially cultivate, skills, resources, your network.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, it makes me wonder, what about internal qualities like kindness, empathy, integrity?
Right.
Where do those fit into this picture?
That's a good point. And while this definition of worth might rub some people the wrong way,
Sure.
there's this other idea the speaker brings up that I found incredibly powerful, the ACEs analogy.
Okay.
It's this reminder that just being alive and healthy, those are incredible gifts in and of themselves.
Yeah, that really resonated with me too, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in what we lack,
Right.
what we're striving for,
Yeah.
that we forget to appreciate the fundamentals.
Exactly.
So I think it begs the question, how can we actively cultivate that sense of gratitude
Yeah.
for the things we so often take for granted?
Right.
It's easy to say, appreciate what you have,
Right.
but are there practical ways to really embody that, to truly internalize it?
I think that's something a lot of us struggle with.
Yeah.
But then the source takes this turn into the ugly man argument.
Okay.
It basically says being unattractive isn't a real problem because a man can compensate with other qualities, even going as far as saying you can be scary. The speaker even uses Floyd Mayweather as an example of someone who commands respect regardless of his height.
Right.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it is. And to be honest, I think this is where things get a bit more complicated.
Right.
I can see how some might find this empowering,
Okay.
right? Don't let a perceived physical flaw hold you back.
Yeah.
Cultivate your confidence,
Yeah.
your presence.
Okay.
But then the flip side of that is, does it perpetuate this idea that men need to be dominant, intimidating, even to be successful?
Right.
I'm not sure that's a message we want to be sending.
And then it goes on to say that complaining about your height is adopting a feminine frame.
Right.
And that men need to become the man.
That phrase really jumped out at me.
Yeah.
It feels like it's revealing some underlying assumptions about gender roles that are, frankly, pretty outdated.
Okay.
It's this idea that complaining is inherently weak,
Yeah.
which completely disregards the emotional range and needs of everyone involved, regardless of gender. Plus, it assumes this very binary view of gender,
Right.
which ignores the beautiful spectrum of experience and expression that exists.
You're right. It's almost like it glosses over the complexity of what it means to become the man
Yes.
without really defining it.
Yes.
What does that even mean in today's world?
Right.
Is it about embodying those more traditional,
Right.
arguably outdated notions of masculinity, or is there a different way to interpret it?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Yeah.
We're not just grappling with one speaker's perspective,
Right.
but with our own beliefs about masculinity, success, and what truly defines a fulfilling life.
Right.
What does it mean to play the hand you're dealt when the rules don't feel fair?
Yeah.
And can you, in fact, rewrite those rules for yourself?
It's a great question. It's almost like the source is saying, look, life's not always fair, but don't don't use that as an excuse to just sit around and complain. Do you think that's an oversimplification? That's the heart of the issue, isn't it? The source is really pushing this idea of like taking control of your life.
Right.
But how much can you really achieve if you're facing like deeply ingrained barriers?
Right.
Things like systemic poverty, discrimination, lack of access to resources.
Right.
Those aren't easily overcome with just willpower.
Yeah, it's like we're talking about two different playing fields here.
Right.
On one hand, you have this message of radical self-responsibility.
Right.
And on the other, there's the reality that we're all products of our environments to some extent.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile those two things?
I think that the source isn't necessarily wrong to highlight personal agency.
Okay.
Right? We can often control our reactions even when we can't control the situations themselves.
Yeah.
But I think we have to balance that with empathy
Right.
and acknowledge those larger forces that shape individual experiences.
Yeah.
It's not about blaming anyone,
Right.
but recognizing that not everyone starts from the same place. Right? So much of this seems to come back to these narrowly defined ideas of success and masculinity, right?
Yeah.
Strength, power,
Yes.
stoicism.
Right.
Those almost feel like outdated stereotypes.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to achieve success and fulfillment without conforming to those ideals?
It definitely pushes those buttons, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets tricky.
Okay.
Because those traditional definitions of masculinity can be incredibly limiting.
Right.
We're seeing a shift, I think, towards embracing vulnerability, emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
and diverse expressions of what it means to be a man.
Right. It's like there's this fear of being perceived as weak or inadequate
Right.
if you don't fit into that like strong and silent mold.
Yeah.
Do you think that's changing?
I think we're moving in the right direction,
Okay.
but there's still work to be done.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that strength can manifest in different ways.
Okay.
It's not just about physical prowess or suppressing emotions.
Right.
It's about resilience,
Okay.
empathy,
Yeah.
and the courage to be your authentic self.
This deep dive has been quite the roller coaster, hasn't it?
It has.
We've got this speaker urging us to embrace our inner aces
Yeah.
and maximize our potential,
Right.
but then also throwing out these pretty loaded statements about gender roles
All right.
and what it means to be a man. It feels like a bit of a mixed bag.
Well, what's fascinating to me is how this source, even with its sometimes abrasive tone, I think it sparks such important conversations.
Yeah.
It's like holding up a mirror to these deeply ingrained societal beliefs
Right.
about self-improvement,
Okay.
masculinity, and success,
Yeah.
and asking us to question what we truly value.
You're right. It's forcing us to confront those potentially uncomfortable questions
Right.
about how our own beliefs might be influenced by those societal norms.
Yeah.
And maybe even more importantly, to ask ourselves if those norms are serving us
Yeah.
or if it's time to rewrite the script. Yeah, it really challenges you to think, like, where are you putting your energy? You know,
Right.
are you dwelling on the things that you can't control?
Right.
Or are you putting that energy towards actually building yourself up?
It's so easy to fall into that trap of comparison,
Right.
especially like with social media
Oh my God.
constantly bombarding us with these often unrealistic portrayals of success
Yeah.
and what it means to be a man.
It's like we're being sold this idea of a perfect hand,
Yeah.
when in reality, everyone's dealing with something.
Exactly. And I think this source, in its own way,
Yeah.
is kind of reminding us that we have a choice
Okay.
in how we frame those imperfections as
Yeah.
perceived shortcomings.
Instead of seeing them as weaknesses, maybe it's about recognizing how those things just make us unique, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
I think that shift in perspective is crucial.
Okay.
It's about asking yourself, how can I leverage my unique strengths, my experiences,
Okay.
even the ones that feel like setbacks,
Right.
to create something meaningful?
It's like that idea of turning your wounds into wisdom, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that those challenges, those so-called bad cards that were dealt,
Yeah.
they often become the source of our greatest growth and resilience.
It reminds me of that quote, the obstacle is the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reframing challenges as opportunities for learning
Okay.
and becoming a more well-rounded individual.
Yeah, it's like this source it's like giving us permission to define success on our own terms.
Yes.
You know, it might not look like what society expects,
Right.
but it's aligned with our values,
Well,
our
yeah.
goals, our definition of a fulfilling life.
And that right there is the key.
Yeah.
You know? It's not about conforming to some external measure of worth.
Yeah.
Achieving some arbitrary definition of manhood.
Right.
It's about cultivating inner strength, resilience, a sense of purpose that comes from within.
This has been an incredible deep dive, I've got to say. It's definitely challenged some of my assumptions about self-improvement and what it really means to become the man.
It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
It is.
And I think the biggest takeaway here is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
It's about being willing to ask those tough questions, challenge the status quo, and ultimately define what success and fulfillment look like for you.
Well said.
Yeah.
I think it's about, like you said, it's about embracing our individuality.
Yeah.
Focusing on what we can control.
Right.
And defining that success on our own terms.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that requires taking a hard look at the hand we've been dealt.
Yeah.
And finding the courage to play it our own way.
I love that.